Hey friends, it's Jessica from Three Rivers Homestead coming to you from my kitchen, and this week I'm bringing you another Pantry Meals video. We are in the middle of our 2025 Three Rivers Challenge. That's the Pantry Challenge that we do every January and February, both here on YouTube and on Instagram. Hi! And during that challenge, I document all the meals that I am feeding my family without going to the grocery store, just using our food storage. So this year's challenge has been a little bit different because I gave birth 2 weeks ago. So my videos, it's been hard to get videos out, but I'm finally back in a routine. This was the first week where I was back to cooking all meals myself and not relying on Adam and the kids and friends and family to help out. So I'm going to be bringing you all of those meals that I prepared. I've separated this video into breakfasts, lunches, and dinners. And I'm just bringing you new meals that I haven't shared frequently. It gets kind of repetitive and boring when I share some of our family favorites that we tend to have every week. So that's why there's not a whole week's worth of breakfast, lunches, and dinners. But I was able to bring you quite a few of the meals that we ate over the last week or so. So that's what we're gonna do in this video. As I mentioned, I'm back to cooking meals this week, which is great. I'm about 2 weeks postpartum now, feeling really good. So my plan for next week is to get back in the swing of housekeeping, getting this house back in order, because I obviously took a break from doing housework while I was recovering, and you're gonna see it in my house in this video. It's rather messy right now. So next week I'm going to get the house back in order, and then the plan is the first week of February to start back with the children, the small children, doing their homeschool work. We took a break during this postpartum time. The older children, who can work much more independently, have kept up with their schoolwork all through this little break that I took. So we are getting back into the swing of things, and I'm excited to bring you all of that here in this video. But before we get started, I do want to give a quick thank you to the sponsor of this video, Backwoods Home Magazine, and their sister magazine, Self-Reliance Magazine. You guys have been hearing me talk about them for the last few months. Adam and I have been enjoying this publication since, it's been probably 15 years ago when we got our first copy, when we were dreaming of our homestead and moving to our property. It's such a wonderful publication, full of information on canning, on different other types of food preservation, on animal husbandry, gardening, all types of self-sufficiency, building things, you name it, it's in the magazine. And what I love about this magazine is there are very few advertisements. It's a really high quality, beautiful publication with beautiful photos and lots of information. So my subscribers can use the link below to get 50% off a yearly subscription, which is an amazing deal. It's about $13 for a whole year worth of the publication. So make sure you check out that link in the video description. And I think if you like my content, homegrown, home canned meals, gardening, lots of that type of stuff, you're gonna love what comes in this magazine. So check out that link. Now we're gonna get started with the week's meals. There's also some information in this video on some ways that I'm going through the freezer and preserving some food. I'll bring you that at the end of this video. We also got our yearly bulk citrus order. As you guys know, that's the one food purchase that I allow throughout the Pantry Challenge, and besides birthday meals. But that citrus order actually is placed in early December, and then it arrives in the end of January, which I picked it up earlier this week. So we have been enjoying all of that fresh citrus in our meals. So if you see fresh citrus, you're probably wondering, where did that come from? That's because my citrus order came. So we're going to go ahead and get started, and I'm going to show you my meals for this week.
So here is that citrus order. I did one 25-pound box of grapefruit, one of mandarin oranges, one of navel oranges, and then I did 2 boxes of lemons to preserve. What I do is I juice these lemons, and then I freeze the juice, and then that's what we use for lemon juice, either for when a recipe calls for lemon juice, we'll thaw some, or if I want to make homemade lemonade throughout the year, this is the lemon juice that I'll use. And I always get questions about where I get this citrus. It came from Sam Puts in Bakersfield, California. They do drops. So what you do is your community will place a large order, and I think you have to order like 75 boxes worth of fruit, and then they'll deliver them to drops in your area. Okay, so here is my meal plan for the week. Every Sunday I sit down and make a plan for the meals. I make a list of everything that I need to go down to the cellar or to the freezers to shop for in our food storage. Then I move my meal plans to my daily planner. You have to keep organized when you're cooking from scratch for a family this size. So here's all the shopping that I did for the week down in the cellar. Just grab all of the canning jars and other dried goods and things that we're going to need to complete our meal plan, bring them upstairs, and then of course we have to check them off of our inventory to make sure that we have an accurate picture of everything that is still in our food storage so that we don't run out of things. And then, like I mentioned, I run out to the freezers and grab the meat for the week, and then I put it in containers, stick it in our fridge to thaw so that we're prepared for our meals. The first breakfast I'm going to show you is a breakfast casserole using some leftovers. So when I make a breakfast casserole, I usually layer some kind of carbohydrate on the bottom. It's typically leftover potatoes or some kind of bread. In this case, we had a lovely meal brought to me by a friend that was rice with steak and like onions and peppers. It was really spicy and delicious. So I'm doing a layer of rice with the onions and the peppers, and I'm trying to pick out as much of that steak as possible. And this is going to be our base layer for this breakfast casserole. I just put it in a greased baking dish. And then the next thing we're going to do is just put some scrambled eggs on top of it. It's really that simple. A lot of times if I'm just putting potatoes in the bottom, then of course I'm going to put a layer of meat and then a layer of some kind of vegetables, and then I'm going to season it all. But in this case, it was all already mixed together in that kind of steak fajita rice mixture. So we're just going to pour the eggs on top, and then I put this in the oven and bake it on 350 degrees, and it usually takes somewhere around 45 minutes to an hour. It just depends on how thick it is. And this is what that looked like. We're going to serve it with some leftover muffins and rolls that a friend had also brought us. This was one of the last meals that I had that friends were bringing postpartum. It was such a blessing. I had a couple friends and family members that spoiled us with meals. And then, of course, we're not wasting the food that they made. We're going to take any leftovers from those meals and turn them into something new. And this breakfast casserole was a great way to use up that rice and all of the meat and veggies. Now we're going to do another breakfast. Last fall, I had made some baking mixes, put together all of the ingredients for some of our favorite breakfasts. I even included freeze-dried eggs in these baking mixes, and I'll link a video in the description that shows you the recipes for these. And then on the lid, I wrote all of the liquid ingredients that I'm going to need to add to this. So I was just adding 5 cups of water to the dry ingredients, and then we had to add our 1/3 a cup of oil, and then a little bit of vanilla extract. And we had like a homemade Bisquick baking mix for pancakes, except it wasn't Bisquick. It was all wonderful organic homegrown eggs and stuff like that. So we're just going to get that mixed together and making a really easy breakfast of waffles for the children. Just pouring it into my waffle iron. When you have this many kids, you just kind of make them one at a time, and as the kids wake up and come down, they get a waffle. So I didn't have a big stack to show you how many waffles we had made for breakfast. This is just kind of what was left after all of the kids had been eating. Now for another carbohydrate breakfast, we are going to make some cinnamon rolls. So I'm starting with 1 cup of warm water. I added a 1/2 cup of sugar to that. Then I'm going to add a 1/2 cup of fat. You want a fat that is solid at room temperature, so like butter or lard or shortening or even coconut oil would work. And then adding a little bit of salt, maybe like a teaspoon or so. And we're going to put that in a pan and get that on the stove to melt down to get that sugar to dissolve and the fat to melt. Now I'm going to get 1/3 a cup of warm water, and I'm going to put my yeast in that to get that activated. So I'm just doing 3 teaspoons of yeast. We're going to stir that around and let that yeast activate. I think this yeast is not active anymore, and it needs to be replaced with new yeast that I have in my fridge because it isn't bubbling very much. So yeast does have a shelf life, which, is why we need to use it up before it goes bad. So I put 5.5 cups of flour in my mixer here, and I'm pulling out my eggs. I need 3 eggs. I'm using water glassed eggs. These are eggs I preserved last spring from the excess that our hens were laying, and we preserve them in a lime water mixture. And then when our hens take a laying break in the winter, then we can pull these out and use these. I mostly use my water glassed eggs for baking, and I use any fresh eggs that the hens are laying for things like scrambled eggs or hard-boiled eggs. Now we're adding our yeast mixture to the eggs and flour and our melted sugar and fat mixture. We're going to put that in, get the lid on our mixer, and let that mixer knead the dough for us for a couple of minutes. Now my dough on this day was still kind of sticky, so I did add a little extra all-purpose flour to that to help make it a little less sticky so that I could form it into a little ball. And we're going to let this rise for an hour while that evening, it was a Sunday evening, and we were watching America's Funniest Videos. That's what we do every Sunday as a family. It's our routine. So I was able to take an hour and watch that with the family. And when the show was over, I came out and punched the dough down and rolled it out to get ready to fill it. We do not have cinnamon rolls very often. This is definitely a treat because it is rather sugary. So I just measure this part with my heart. I put some sugar in a bowl, sprinkle in some cinnamon, add a little bit of oil. I'm using avocado oil on this particular day, and we just mix that together, and that is our filling. So like I said, we do not have cinnamon rolls very often. I know people are going to comment about the amount of sugar in this breakfast, and you know what? It is not going to kill the children. It's going to keep them very happy, and we will serve it with a side of protein tomorrow. So I know there are some people that are very anti-sugar and never feed it to their children. We are not that kind of family. I think a little bit of sugar in moderation, these treats for the children. If I make them homemade, they're a little bit healthier than store-bought versions, and it's kind of like the forbidden fruit. Like if I serve them homemade versions of these treats, it keeps them from craving the unhealthier processed versions of them. And so I am okay with this amount of sugar for my children. So we're going to put that in the fridge overnight and let those rise a little bit. Like I said, my yeast wasn't very active. And then the protein that I decided to cook for them, I found some kielbasa in the back of a freezer that I had thawed out, and I'm just going to saute that up in a pan. We need to make the glaze for the top of the cinnamon rolls, so just a little bit of powdered sugar, some vanilla, and a tiny bit of almond milk or water. Mix that together, and then once our cinnamon rolls baked in the oven it took maybe 35 minutes. We're going to pull them out, let them cool down a little bit, and then we can pour our glaze over the top. The reason I made cinnamon rolls on this day, it was a day off work for Adam. It was Martin Luther King Jr. Day, and he was home from work, and I just thought since Adam was home to enjoy breakfast with us, I would make a special sweet treat that the family would enjoy. And as always, cinnamon rolls and kielbasa is a hit. Everyone was very happy with this breakfast. Now we're going to move on to another breakfast, but on the day before I made this breakfast, I needed to cook some of our homegrown squash. This is Canada crookneck squash that I grew in the garden last winter, and I have a lot of it down in storage that needs to be used up. So on this day, I decided to cook some of the squash to puree so that I could make pumpkin muffins for the next morning's breakfast. So we just kind of cooked those down in the oven it was maybe an hour or so, and then once it was done, I was able to scoop out the flesh from the squash and puree it down. We do have a lot of canned butternut squash, home canned butternut squash, but I'm trying to use up the fresh squash first before I dig into my canned stuff. But the canned is definitely more convenient. I just don't want to waste our fresh stuff. So we got all of that scooped out. I just add a little bit of water to it because it was kind of dry from being baked. Use my immersion blender to get that all blended together. and I had approximately, 2 cups of pumpkin puree or squash puree that we put in the fridge overnight for the next morning's breakfast. So we are going to make some pumpkin muffins. I'm starting out with flour. I used 3 cups of flour to 1.5 cups of sugar. Now we're going to add our baking powder, which for this particular recipe is 4 teaspoons of baking powder. To that, I'm going to add 2 teaspoons of cinnamon, 1 teaspoon of nutmeg, and 1 teaspoon of ground cloves, as well as a teaspoon of salt. Those are all of our dry ingredients. We're going to get that all mixed together. Now we can add our eggs. I'm doing 4 eggs. And then we need to add our oil. I have a little helper here who's wanting to stir. Whenever she sees that whisk in the bowl, she crawls up on the counter and wants to help me stir. So it's wonderful to have a helper like that. I added about 2/3 of a cup of oil, and then we're going to add our 2 cups of that pumpkin puree that we had made the day before. Now we just need to get that all mixed together. Now this recipe, I can make it as a bread. Sometimes I'll add chocolate chips to it, but we're actually out of chocolate chips. Sometimes I just leave it plain and I make muffins. And for time's sake, I decided to make it into muffins this day because muffins bake up a lot faster than a bread, which is kind of thicker in the center. And when I have hungry kids waking up and wanting to eat, it just makes more sense to do muffins to get it done faster. So we got our muffins all ready to go, put those in the oven, and then I'm working on a protein to serve them with their muffins. We're going to do scrambled eggs for this breakfast. It takes about 18 or so scrambled eggs to feed our family. And this is what that looked like. Adam was home once again on this day because the weather dropped very cold. It was frigid, like 20 below zero with the wind chill. So the university had closed for the day. We had him home. He's enjoying Abby while I'm cooking breakfast, and a nice little breakfast to warm us up on this frigid day. So those are some of the breakfasts that we had over this week. I'm not sharing duplicate meals, just kind of sharing you some of the new stuff that I haven't put in videos for this year's Pantry Challenge. Now let's move on to lunches. So for lunch one day I had some leftover sausage and peas, and I just mixed those together and put them in a pot on the stove to let the fat in that sausage melt down a little bit. To that, we're just adding a quart of tomato sauce, and I decided to just make a quick and easy pasta for the kids for lunch for this meal. I can never go wrong with pasta. The kids will always eat it, and so since I had the right amount of leftover sausage to make a lunch pasta, this worked out perfectly. For our pasta, I'm using this store-bought stuff that I get in bulk from Azure Standard. I love buying this for the kids, particularly the little ones who are learning their alphabet and learning how to read. They really enjoy having the little letters in their bowl that they can call out as they're eating their lunch. So just really simple, boiled the noodles, add our little sauce mixture here, nothing special. And you can't go wrong with this. The kids are always going to eat pasta. And as a mother, this is one of those really quick and easy lunches that, you can always make spaghetti or pasta in no time at all. And you're pretty much ensured that all of the children, whether they're 2 years old or almost 18 years old, they're going to eat it. Now let's move on to another lunch that we made this week. I am really, now that I'm back on my feet, cooking meals pretty much full time, I am leaning on my home canned convenience meals quite a bit. This was beef stew starter that I canned up last fall. It has all of the meat and seasonings for beef stew, like the onions and the garlic and all of the spices and things. So I put 2 quarts of that in a pot, and to that I'm adding a half pint of my home canned tomato paste. This is gonna be a dump a bunch of jars in the pot and go kind of meal. To that, I'm adding 1 quart of canned carrots with the broth from the jar, and then we have a quart of home canned potatoes. And this beef stew is just one of the easiest meals that you can make for your family using canned ingredients from your pantry. We also had this little amount of leftover mashed potatoes from a previous night's dinner, so I just decided to add those in there. and a little extra water to clean out those jars. Those mashed potatoes are just going to kind of disintegrate into the stew and thicken up the broth and really give it a good texture. Add a little salt and pepper, and then this can sit on the stove and cook all day while we went about our business. At this point, my business is just taking care of my newborn and myself. So this is what our stew looked like after it had warmed up for most of the morning. It's so delicious, especially on these frigid days that we had this week. This really warmed the children up. Some of them like to eat it with some crackers. Thankfully, in our pantry, we still have some saltine crackers and things. So some of them will crumble that up, and that was a really easy lunch. Let's move on to another easy lunch. This is a jar of home canned white chicken chili base. So it's the chicken and broth. It has like jalapeno peppers, green peppers, onion, garlic, cumin, all of the spices you would put in white chicken chili. So I did 2 quarts of that white chicken chili base, and to it I added a quart of black beans as well as a little bit more water. And then I looked at it as I was stirring up, and later on I added another pint of kidney beans to it because I just felt like it needed a little more bulk to it. And this is just, we've been eating so much red chili, like a beef-based tomato sauce chili. I thought I would switch it up and still give the kids a little spice. They love chili so much, and we would do a chicken version of it this week. So this is what it looked like. One of those meals that definitely tastes better than it looks, but also really comforting food when the temperatures are below 0. Now let's move on to dinners for the week. So it was a crock pot night, a night where we were having activities. So I need something that can go in the crock pot so that the children that are coming and going throughout the evening have hot food available that they can just scoop out of the crock pot when they're ready. I'm adding to it some of this is homegrown beef. We are very blessed to have a butcher that does commercial canning. So they can up our homegrown beef in these containers like this for us. And it's almost like a roast beef texture, and it has a little bit of broth in it. You could see the white that I was picking out of the crock pot is the tallow. As the beef cooks down in the can, the fat renders and forms this large chunk of tallow. I don't want all of that grease in my soup here tonight, so I'm pulling that out, but we will save that tallow to use for a cooking fat. Now we're just going to mash up that beef, and a lot of people ask what this tastes like. It just tastes like roast. It's wonderful to shred up for things like barbecue beef sandwiches or beef and rice, and it's also great in soups like this. I'm going to make a taco soup, so I added a total of a quart of beans. We did kidney and black beans. To that, I'm going to add 1 quart of our Southwestern vegetable soup starter. I use the ball canning recipe for this. It has a bunch of like spices, kind of like taco spices, corn, tomato-based with vegetables. And to that, I'm adding an extra pint of home canned corn. And I'm going to add another quart of tomato sauce. So as I mentioned, this already had a lot of spices in it. It had things like cumin, it had paprika, it had some hot peppers, some regular bell peppers, onion, garlic. Everything's already there. That's why I love soup starters or soup bases. It makes a really easy meal. I can just put this crock pot on low for the whole day, and by dinner, the kids have something to eat. So they'll just scoop this out as the kids get home from their activities, and they can grab a bowl. They can eat it with some corn chips or some crackers or whatever they would like to kind of bulk it up and add some carbohydrates. And this taco soup always goes over well with my children. For another dinner, I felt like we hadn't had fish in quite a while. We were eating a lot of beef and pork, so we are going to have some salmon for dinner. And my easiest way is just to bake it. I add a little bit of Old Bay seasoning on top, and since we have fresh citrus in the house, I put some lemon slices on top of it, and we just bake it in the oven on 350 degrees until it's done. I rinsed some rice, and we are going to cook some rice with this. The night before, I had made a pork roast, and I had the leftover drippings from that roast that I just melted down quickly in the oven while the fish was cooking. and we're going to pour that flavor. The flavor, don't waste those roast drippings. They have great flavor and fat, and it's perfect for seasoning your rice and giving it amazing flavor. So just added a little extra water. We're going to cook that rice, and then I pulled some frozen shredded cabbage that we had preserved last summer. Pulled that out of the freezer. We're just going to saute that up in a pan with some oil to serve as our vegetable side. And this is what we're looking at. We have salmon, we have some delicious flavored rice, and the sauteed cabbage that I just added a little bit of salt and pepper to. And this was a wonderful break from the typical pork and beef meals that we had been eating. Another dinner that we had this week is crock pot ribs. To it, I'm going to add some of our home canned apple barbecue sauce. I love this recipe. I will leave a link to the video where I make this in the video description. This is an amazing barbecue sauce. So yummy. We're just going to put that in the crock pot and let this cook on low throughout the day. It was another night where we had activities, so I need food that will be available for children at different times. So after it had cooked all day, got to get that steam. It's so cold in the kitchen that everything is steamy when it's hot. This is what our ribs looked like. And why I love making ribs in the crock pot is then it's really easy to just pull those bones out. Makes it much easier to serve these ribs to the little children. Instead of them grabbing the ribs by the bone and eating them and making a mess, I can just pull all the bones out. I can shred up the meat and put it back in the crock pot, and then the kids can eat it with a fork instead of having to eat the ribs with their hand. So definitely much easier to serve with our ribs. I boiled up some potatoes, and I just grabbed some frozen mixed vegetables. We're just going to have some quick and easy mashed potatoes and veggies. To my mashed potatoes, I added some of that barbecue sauce and fat from the bottom of the crock pot. That gave the mashed potatoes some really good flavor. And this is what a plate looked like for that meal. Just another easy crock pot meal. I'm all about, as you can tell, really easy meals during this season of life. I need that. In going through the freezer this week, a Pantry challenge is all about using things from the freezer. I found fat from a steer that we had butchered over the summer. And we have 2 heifers that are coming to the freezer, so I needed to clear out the old fat to make room for what's going to be coming. So I had 4 total packages of this beef fat, and we're going to render it down into some tallow. So I'm just chunking it up. I thawed the fat first. I'm cutting it into chunks because the smaller you chunk it, the faster it will melt down or render down. I've run it through a meat grinder before. That's a great way to do it really quickly. But I find that it takes a lot of effort then to clean that fat out of the grinder, that I think it's just as easy to cut it up and chunk it up this way versus having to pull out the grinder and then deal with cleaning it up. So I would rather just wash one roasting pan than have to clean the roasting pan and a meat grinder. So I'm cutting out any chunks of fat that have meat attached to them. That will prevent this tallow from having an extremely beefy flavor. It always has a slight beefy flavor to me, which is why I don't necessarily use my tallow to make like lotions a lot of the times. We prefer to use our tallow as a cooking fat. It's mostly what we use for deep frying if we're going to make like homemade potato chips or chicken fingers or things like that. We also will fry potatoes or eggs or things in our tallow. I added a little bit of water to the bottom of the roaster pan. That's to prevent the fat from sticking before it starts to melt down. And then throughout the day, I just make sure to come and stir it so that nothing is sticking and burning. And I have this on about 250 degrees, and we're just slowly letting it melt down. If you put it on too high of a heat, it's going to cook and once again have a beefy flavor. And we would like it to have as neutral of a flavor as possible. And you can see throughout the day, it renders down, and any little skin bits or anything turn into essentially like pork cracklings, but with beef. And then we can start ladling the liquid out of the roaster into our jars. And as you can see, when it's hot, it's like a golden yellow color. As it cools, it will solidify and turn a beautiful snow white. We do not need to can this. we'll just put lids on the top, and then as long as we store it somewhere that is cool and dry and dark, these typically last in my pantry for about 12 months. If I plan on not using it within 12 months, I will put it in my overflow fridge or freezer just to preserve the shelf life. You don't want them to mold at all. But as you can see, as it's cooling, it kind of starts from the bottom and works its way up. It's turning white. I've got my big boys back there bringing in firewood, and it didn't take long for it to solidify in my extremely cold kitchen on this day. And that is what we were up to this week.
All right, guys, that is it for this week. I hope you enjoyed that peek into my kitchen and how I'm feeding my family from our food storage without going to the grocery store. And I will be back next week with more meal ideas. It's so fun to be finally using all of this food from the pantry. A lot of this food I canned intentionally this summer while I was pregnant, knowing that throughout the winter I would be postpartum and not feeling 100%. So having these convenience foods in jars, baking mixes that were stored up has just been such a blessing. And I'm, as I mentioned in the beginning of this video, really enjoying getting back on my feet. The end of my pregnancy was kind of rough and I didn't feel great. And then these first weeks postpartum, I needed to rest and recover. It feels so good this past week to be up and moving in the kitchen and cooking for my family, because I love nothing more than that, feeding them nutritious, wonderful home-cooked meals and seeing them enjoy that food. So hopefully you enjoy the meals that I cooked this week. And once again, I want to thank the sponsor of this video, Backwoods Home Magazine. Make sure you check out the link in the video description and get 50% off your subscription to this wonderful publication. All right, friends, I hope you have a blessed week. I will be back next week with another video in the Three Rivers Challenge. Make sure you're also checking out the hashtag. If you click on the hashtag, you can see all of the wonderful content creators that are also participating in the Three Rivers Challenge and sharing their food preservation ideas and meal ideas. It's just such a wonderful community that we've built here, and I'm enjoying browsing all of your content. All right, friends, we will see you next week. Bye.